Chapter 29, Fortune's Fires. When the vote was finally taken, and following much debate, it was nearly unanimous. Caleb was chosen to lead the way for the two teams in the assault on Rolando's ship. Caleb and Nikko would guide the two teams to the ship, and then they would split up from there. Nikko and Caleb would go in to rescue the other children on the ship, while the men would try to find and capture Rolando to force his men to surrender. As Joseph and Tom McNeil began preparing their horses, James Rickton, along with Brian McNeil and several of the other men, prepared, loaded, and distributed all the rifles equally among the men, even taking time to train several of them on how to properly use them, since many of the men had never even seen a rifle, let alone fire one before. Samuel and the warriors from the village were the only group who decided to not use rifles, but rather stay with their own weapons instead. As the two teams readied, Caleb began to have some self-doubts as he carefully pondered his next move. Caleb sat alone next to the side of the barn, finishing off the last bite or two of his bowl of chili, as Nikko approached him. "Caleb, are you okay?" "The others are just about ready," he said, noticing that Caleb seemed far away in thought. Caleb was far away, farther away than anyone could possibly know. He had spent the last 30 minutes trying to force a moment alone with the old Caleb once again, but nothing and no one ever came. Of all the times he had wished the visions would go away before, now he would have welcomed them. Only one thought kept racing through his mind, something that the old Caleb told him repeatedly: "You will have to give up something, to gain something." He wondered about that. What did that mean? What will he have to give up? Caleb savored the last bite of chili as he caught himself staring down into the bottom of his bowl. "Caleb, are you all right?" asked Nikko once again, determined to get an answer. "Yeah, sorry Nikko, I'm fine, just thinking." "About what?" "So, I lead everyone to the ship, what then?" Caleb mumbled, questioning himself and his vision. "Why can't I remember?" Nikko nodded slowly, as he thought. "Did you actually see the ship in your vision?" "Yes. But that's not all that I'm thinking about." "Did you see any people you might recognize in your vision?" "Yes." "What were they doing?" "What's that?" Caleb asked, still lost in his own thoughts. "The people you saw, think carefully, what were the people in your vision doing?" Caleb closed his eyes tightly a moment, trying to recall the events of his earlier vision. Slowly, some of the details of it began to return. He remembered seeing the lights of the ship as it was near the docks, the crewmen loading cages upon cages into the ship's hold, the ramp up from the dock, the crew on deck, and then, there they were, Stephen, Peter, and Mark, and then Martha and Elsa, being walked up the ramp with their hands tied, all being led into, then he drew a blank again. Nikko momentarily interrupted Caleb's thoughts. "It's too bad you didn't have another set of eyes." "What's that?" "I said it's too bad you didn't have another person with you. Sometimes a second set of eyes can give you a different perspective on things," suggested Nikko. "At least, that's what my Aunt Chelina always tells me." Slowly, as Caleb thought about Nikko's last remark, a smile formed on his face. "Nikko, your Aunt Chelina is a genius," he shouted, as he jumped up and ran over to where Wilkes and Spencer had just finished eating, while being guarded by Kurt Miller. Nikko followed along, curious as to what he might have said to get Caleb so excited. "Mr. Wilkes, I need you to help me," shouted Caleb, feeling a sudden exuberance he had never felt before. "Oh, yes. You're the little dreamer boy," replied Wilkes. "So, what can I do for you, dreamer boy?" "You got it all figured out, don't you? I mean, you know the way to the ship and all because of a dream you had," laughed Wilkes, kicking Spencer in the foot. "He gonna get them lost, just wait and see," boasted Wilkes, watching Caleb scratching in the dirt. "Okay kid, I'll play along. What can I do to help you?" asked Wilkes. "Nikko, I need some light. Can you find me a lantern from inside the barn?" Caleb asked. Caleb found a short wooden stick and began drawing in the dirt in front of Wilkes, who was watching Caleb with a mixture of amusement as well as amazement. Nikko held a lantern overhead as Caleb continued to draw. "There," said Caleb, "look, Mr. Wilkes, down here." Caleb pointed in the dirt with his stick. Meanwhile, Kurt Miller had motioned for the attention of Samuel Ward and Joseph, who had just finished getting all the horses ready. Kurt whispered to Daniels as he walked over, "Caleb's up to something, we should watch." "All right, Mr. Wilkes, here's what I need from you to help me. Watch carefully, I'm going to draw a map. Here is the main river over here," Caleb continued as he pointed to different areas on his map in the dirt. "Here are the boat docks, and here is the main trail along the shore that leads to the docks." "How am I so far?" asked Caleb. Wilkes grunted slightly. "You're doing well, so far. Over here, there's a slight ridge that leads to the south of the docks and a trail just south of there, along over here." Again Caleb continued, pointing to his dirt map. "How am I doing so far?" Wilkes grunted again. Spencer's attention had also begun to perk up. "Wow, that's amazing, kid." Wilkes gave Spencer an angry look. "Hey, don't get mad at me. I thought you just said the kid would get lost," asked Spencer. Caleb grinned, and then leaned in closer to Wilkes. "Here's what I need you to tell me. Where on the ship would I be able to find the explosives?" Wilkes' eyes suddenly widened. "How the hell do you know about those?" he asked. "Never mind, kid. Who gave you all this information you have? It's obvious to me that someone is giving you this information. There's no way on earth you could have known all this from some bloody dream you had." Wilkes folded his arms across his chest. "I ain't saying another damn word. You've got everything you need already, kid." Caleb breathed a heavy sigh. "That's unfortunate, mister." "Wilkes, because it would really help us to know where those explosives are kept. It might help save time and save lives," confided Caleb. Daniels, who had been silent so far, spoke up. "Mr. Wilkes, Mr. Spencer, we've been very, very gracious to you too this afternoon. We've given you medical attention and even gave you food and drink. Meanwhile, we have had 3 of our people injured, 1 of our men has died, and 5 of our children kidnapped because of you. We've decided we really don't like the man you work for, and I'm starting to think we really don't like you either," insisted Daniels. "If you don't start talking and telling this young man what he needs to know, I think we'll take you back with us and drop you off with Rolando himself, with a little note attached, letting him know that it was you who led us straight to his ship." "All right, okay, I'll tell you what you want to know," grumbled a reluctant Wilkes. "First thing you should know is that Rolando's not our boss. Our real boss is Captain Artemis. He runs and owns the ship. We just follow Mr. Rolando because he works for the company, and it was the company that paid the cost of our trip up here. The company sent us up here to collect all the wild people we could find, so we could take them back to Havana. From Havana, they ship them off to anyone that needs them and sells them as slaves in order to rebuild all the cities and roads." "Wild people? Do we look like wild people to you, Mr. Wilkes?" asked Daniels, who was getting a great deal more information than he bargained for, as he continued to probe Wilkes with more questions. "Well, there are some wild people that live around these parts, I'll tell you that," said Spencer. "You're talking about the shadow people," mumbled Caleb, "the ones that have pale white skin and red eyes." "Yeah, exactly. That's just what they look like, all right. And are they a wild bunch? They can't even talk. They just mumble off a bunch of gibberish," said Spencer. "That's one reason why we brought all the cages." "Cages?" shrieked Daniels, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yes, I saw the cages in my vision," mumbled Caleb. "I saw my brother, Mark, Peter, and the girls, all being loaded up on the ship, and then the cages below decks." "How many people can you load up on a ship like yours?" asked Daniels. Wilkes thought a moment. "We have enough cages on the Fortune to carry about 75, but we can squeeze a few more in if necessary. You know, Mr. Daniels, it's no great loss as I see it, taking these wild people away from the kind of life they're living right now. When we found these people living in the tunnels up in the old capital city, they'd been living all these years off the rats, bugs, and weeds that grow in the tunnels," said Wilkes, cringing at the thought of them again. "At least, where we take them, they get normal food and drink and a decent bed to sleep in." "So, how long has Captain Artemis been coming up here to collect slaves?" asked Daniels. "This is our 3rd trip up this far north. Captain Artemis plans on going even farther north next year in the spring." "Where's Captain Artemis at now?" Why didn't he come with you instead of Rolando? Miller asked. He took some men and went north up into the old capital city. He went to find more of those shadow people, as you call them, explained Wilkes. They do make good workers, you know, once they get bathed and trained a bit. Caleb leaned in close again this time. Okay, Mr. Wilkes, let's go over this one more time. I need to know, where on the ship will I find the explosives, and in what part of the ship are the captives normally held? All right, kid, I'll tell you. If you hand me that stick of yours and untie me, I'll draw you a little map, offered Wilkes. Both teams of men and horses were ready as Nikko and Caleb walked their horses up to the lead position at the front of line, where Daniels and Samuel were both waiting. Caleb, are you two ready? It's about 10 o'clock, if we don't get started soon, reminded Daniels. Caleb fidgeted with Teddy's bridle, checking and double-checking his saddle straps. It was another one of those times where he wished he could call on his vision in a moment's notice, but it wasn't to be. He reached into his saddlebags and shuffled around. There you are, thought Caleb, as he pulled out the old map, the one he had found in the cave. He was trying desperately to recall something, anything from his dream to give him a starting point. Closing his eyes, he tried to recall in his mind's eye. There was a creek, then a bridge, a round sign and the trail. There was a factory next to the river. He thought and thought and thought. What were those numbers? 294. Caleb shouted out loud, spooking Nikko's horse, as Samuel frowned slightly, then looked over at his son Nikko and Daniels. Does he do this all the time? Samuel asked, very seriously. Daniels chuckled slightly. No, just lately, I'm afraid. 294, muttered Caleb to himself, as he opened up his map and placed it against the side of his horse to get a better view. Help me, someone, I need a lantern. Daniels got off his horse and went back into the barn and grabbed one of the large oil lamps from inside. Here, Caleb, he offered, suddenly realizing that Caleb had an old map of Virginia. Where did you get this, Caleb? Daniels asked, shaking his head, and then suddenly stopped his questioning. Never mind, like all the other surprises today, let me guess, the cave? Caleb nodded his head as he continued examining the map. Here is where our camp is on the map, Mr. Daniels. We have to take this trail, the same one that we took this morning out to the cave, which runs along the creek. But, when we get here, he pointed at the map, remember the trail that turns and goes south, the one with the old signs with number 294 written on them? Asked Caleb. Yeah, Daniels replied, nodding his head. Well, we go south from there as far as we can until we reach the ruins of an old factory, and Caleb mumbled on, faster than Daniels could keep up as his fingers were tracing the patterns on the old map. I got it. Caleb shouted, quickly folding up the map and returning it to his saddlebags. Thanks, Mr. Daniels, I'm ready to go now. Daniels sighed heavily, handing the lantern over to Sarah, who had been watching the whole time. Sarah, your son, he shook his head slightly. You say God is trying to tell us something. Well, I hope you are right about this. Daniels barely had time to get back on his horse as Caleb and Nikko took off. Follow me, everybody. Caleb shouted as he jerked hard on Teddy's reins. Go, boy, he hollered, as Teddy took off down the trail at a fast trot, heading northeast up the main trail. Caleb could hear Teddy's heavy sighs as his feet pounded the trail beneath him, mile after mile. Just a little farther, boy, just a little farther, urged Caleb in Teddy's ear. Caleb could hear Nikko's horse just a few yards behind him, and the rest of the team following close behind Nikko, as they passed one familiar landmark after another with only the dim moonlight and stars above to guide him on the trail. Just how much farther could he push Teddy? Caleb wasn't sure. As he approached the first major junction on the trail, he noticed a small pond off to the left, shimmering in the reflection of moonlight, and directed Teddy to stop there for a short rest. Whoa, right here, Teddy. This is where we're going to stop for a few minutes, said Caleb, as he stepped down off his horse. Behind him he could hear the other riders doing the same. A few seconds later, he could hear his horse Teddy, enthusiastically lapping up the cool water from the pond. How much farther do you think it is, Caleb? Nikko asked. I would say we are almost halfway there, reasoned Caleb. We're making good time, don't you think? He asked, noticing Elder Daniels passing nearby. Yes, Caleb, but remember, we don't want to push our horses too hard. Samuel's men already endured a long ride this afternoon from their village, and we've covered at least 5 or 6 miles since we left camp. Looking at your map, I would guess we have about another 9 or 10 miles before we get to the ship, speculated Daniels, whose red Arabian he named Firefly was now also lapping up the cool water of the pond next to Teddy. I'd say give all the teams about 20 minutes or so to cool down and rest, then we should all be ready to hit the trail again, suggested Daniels. You've done well, Caleb. Daniels turned to go find Samuel, as Caleb noticed several of the men, who were feeding their horses apples and oats, could also be seen digging into their saddlebags for food and snack for themselves as well. Seth Daniels had been riding close behind his father since they left camp and now double-checking both their saddles, noticed Caleb and Nikko standing alone, silently gazing at the pond. You two look as if you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, continued Seth. You've done well today, Caleb. You really surprised us all. Stephen would be proud of you, and so would your dad. Thanks, Seth, that means a lot, replied Caleb. I speak for all the other guys too when I say, I am proud to ride with you. Thanks. And when we get to the ship, if you need any help at all, Caleb, I'll be ready. Seth paused, looking at the moon. They're my friends too, and I want to do all I can to help bring them home. Seth patted their backs and then turned around to resume checking on his horse. Nikko turned to Caleb. You're still worried about something else, aren't you? I'm not sure I'm up to this, Nikko, Caleb quietly confided. In my visions, I was warned that I would have to lose something to gain something. Now with Stephen and Martha both being held captive on the ship, sighed Caleb, I'm just afraid. Daniels and Samuel were walking quietly up behind the two boys. I see, continued Nikko. Fear can be an enemy, Caleb, but my father told me long ago that fear can be a great ally. How's that? We use our fear to keep our senses sharp and keen, Nikko continued. We use our brains rather than our strength to think things through. And not make stupid mistakes, added Caleb. Caleb felt a hand rest upon his shoulder. Caleb, you're not feeling any different than the rest of us are right now, insisted Daniels, as Samuel nodded too. None of us has ever been in a situation quite like this one. There is a chance that someone in our group may get hurt or killed before we're done tonight. What about killing others? Caleb asked softly. Well, we might even have to do that too, Caleb, explained Daniels. I know what the Bible tells us about killing, but we must also remember that the Bible teaches us that there's a time for everything. There is a time for war and a time for peace. Right now, Caleb, is a time for war. Daniels paused and then turned around to face Caleb. Caleb, right now, you have to ask yourself, are you prepared to kill in order to save your brother Stephen, Martha, and the others? It was nearly midnight as the first team reached the top of the ridge overlooking the Fortune's makeshift harbor. Caleb and Nikko had only to wait a minute or two for Joseph and Samuel to catch up, in order to share the satisfaction of the scene before them as they rested their horses and their men for a short time from their arduous journey. They could see the Fortune lying at anchor ahead, brightly lit from bow to stern, as men could be seen walking back and forth on her docks, preparing to load the ship with their cargo of the day. There she is, exclaimed Daniels, reaching into one of his saddlebags and pulling out a pair of binoculars. Something I brought along, a little prize from the cave. Did you bring any extra pair? Asked Caleb. As a matter of fact, I did, said Daniels, taking out a second pair from one of his other bags and then handing them over to Samuel, who seemed slightly unsure of what to do with them as Daniels demonstrated their proper usage. What do you see, Mr. Daniels? Asked Caleb. I see about 24 men gathered over by the large building near the docks, and they don't seem to be doing anything particular at the moment, observed Daniels. Do you see any of our people or your people over there? Asked Nikko. Here, Nikko, you look, gives me headache, mumbled Samuel. After scanning around the dock area some more, as well as the boat itself, Daniels handed his pair over to Caleb. Let me know if you see anything. Caleb took a minute or two. I think they're already locked up in the ship, replied Caleb. Daniels licked his lips as he formed ideas in his head. Well, whatever we're gonna do, we better get moving. We have the advantage for now. They don't know we're here. Yes, I agree, said Samuel. What are you thinking then, Mr. Daniels? Asked Nikko. Daniels looked over at Caleb and Nikko as he swallowed hard. We take both groups around the shore trail as fast as we can and catch him by surprise. From there, we proceed to the ship in. No, that won't work, blurted Caleb, still looking through the binoculars. Well, son, if you've got a better idea, taunted Daniels. You two go ahead and take the two teams around on the shore trail, just like you said, while Nikko and I take a small group around to the south over that way. Caleb motioned to the southeast where it was dark. There's another trail, south of here, that we can take that will lead us around closer, behind the ship. Daniel's eyes widened a bit. You know this for sure, do you? Caleb nodded. We go around as quietly as possible. Give us about a 20-minute head start then. Caleb paused and thought. We need a way to signal you somehow, said Caleb, pondering a way to send a signal. Nikko put his hands together around his mouth and let out a soft whistle, like the sound of a dove. Yes, Nikko, good, that will work, replied Samuel. Daniel grinned. I like it. Caleb continued, good, then when you hear that signal, start your attack on the docks. Meanwhile, me, Nikko, Seth, and Zeke will climb up those ropes and up onto the ship. Once we're on deck, we'll look for our people, free them and get them off the ship. So, our attack is a diversion then, mumbled Daniels. Yes, they'll be so busy worrying about your attack, proposed Caleb, they won't even notice a few of us quietly climbing up the ropes behind them. Good plan, said Samuel. I will pass the word to my people. Samuels turned around to tell his men about the attack, as Daniels lowered his voice to speak to Caleb. One more thing, Caleb, why were you asking Wilkes earlier about the location of the explosive charges on the ship? What are you intending to do? After we find everyone and free them, we are going to blow up that ship, insisted Caleb, noticing the look of disbelief from Daniels. But why, Caleb? Why not just free our people and let it go? And what if they're not on the ship, but somewhere else? Asked Daniels. I know they're on the ship, Mr. Daniels, and we need to blow up the ship because what they are doing is wrong. It's wrong to God, and it's wrong for men. We have to let these people know that this is our land, these are our homes, and we will fight to defend them, insisted Caleb, looking over towards Nikko. The Cherokee people, who live in Nikko's village, and the other tribes and villages as well, keep watch and defend their community by helping each other. We must learn to do the same for our own people, Mr. Daniels. Or else those like Rolando will continue to prey on us, steal our food, and burn our homes. I also remember the stories Grandpa Jacob used to tell about the great America of the past, and in the days after the cataclysm, how people used violence to and intimidation against each other. We can't let that happen again, pleaded Caleb. It's okay, Caleb, I agree, you're right. But remember this, Caleb, no matter how many ships we blow up, there's always going to be more ships, said Daniels, turning to Samuel. We're going to bring all our people safely home tonight. Does everyone understand? Daniels asked. Everyone nodded. Is everyone ready? Everyone nodded again. Very well, we'll wait for Nikko's signal, and then we'll begin our attack on the boat docks. Good luck, you two, exclaimed Daniels quietly, as Nikko, Caleb and the other boys took off down the southern trail towards the ship. Several minutes later, as they both gazed through their binoculars, Joseph and Samuel could see the river water rippling in the moonlight as they heard Nikko's soft whistle in the distance. Looking again, they could see the boys entering the water near the stern of the ship. They're in, whispered Samuel, as he and Daniels signaled to the others to begin the attack. Dominguez and his men had been busy unloading the extra cargo all evening from the Fortune and placing it into the storage warehouse near the docks to make room for all the extra cargo taken from the inland clans. Now that all the prisoners from the morning had been loaded into the hold of the ship, he and the men could take some time to relax and unwind after the long day. I'm bushed. Anyone here see Mr. Rolando? Asked one of the crewmen as he walked by carrying one of the crates of extra cargo from the ship to load in the warehouse. He's probably taking a bath right now up on the ship, I'll wager, piped young Orrin Anders as he sat, perched on one of the last supply crates remaining to be stowed in the warehouse. Good, I'm taking me a break for some whiskey when I'm done here, growled the crewman. Anybody see what happened to Mr. Montez? Asked Anders. He's not doing well. Last I saw him, Mr. Valdez was tending to his wounds up in the infirmary, mumbled Dominguez. The captain's not going to be happy with Mr. Rolando when he gets back. No, he's not. That Rolando's went and made a real mess of things, said Anders. Did you get those kids locked up for me up in the ship, Mr. Anders? Asked Dominguez. Yes, sir, I did, and I put all the keys away in your office just like you told me. What are we holding them for anyway? We're waiting for Wilkes and Spencer to bring the rest of the guns and the equipment from that cave belonging to the Elgins, bellowed Dominguez. Knowing those two, they probably got themselves lost out there. Suddenly, Dominguez and his men heard a strange sound coming towards them from along the western shoreline trail. What the hell do you suppose that is? Uttered Dominguez. Sounds like a pack of wild coyotes running this way, insisted Anders. On horses, barked Dominguez. Dominguez and several of the other crewmen, who had previously been sitting around, jumped up and moved out of the lantern light of the dock area to get a better look down the trail at what they were hearing. There in the moonlight, about a quarter mile up the trail, they could see the outlines of dozens upon dozens of riders approaching on horses at a full gallop. Holy Jesus! Shouted Dominguez. Quick everyone, grab your rifles and take cover. We're under attack, yelled Anders.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.